Is everybody in? Is everybody in? Is everybody in? The ceremony is about to begin.
Good evening and welcome to this exclusive car park demolition webinar in conjunction with C&D Engineering Consultants. I'm going to be bringing C&D's Mike Kehoe onto the show in just a second, but first I want to say a very quick good evening to both Gary Muirhead and to Dan Cullen, who has just joined us, and Al Grierson is watching all the way from Luxembourg. I want to let you know precisely why we're revisiting this subject. Our regular viewers will probably know that we actually looked at this same topic roughly a year ago, but there's been a lot of press coverage in the past few weeks about the damage that might be inflicted upon the nation's multi-storey car parks by electric vehicles. As you're about to hear, those electric vehicles can weigh more than 4 times the vehicles of the 1960s and 70s that those car parks were actually designed to accommodate. So, I'm not the expert in this. In fact, I'm hardly going to be on screen at all this evening. I'm going to hand over to Mike Kehoe, but let's get him on the stream and welcome him aboard. Good evening, Mike.
Hi, Mark. How are you doing? Hi, everyone.
Yeah, not too bad. Thank you very much. Are those World Demolition Awards on above your head there?
Yes, you have me there. Yes.
I already said that you are the expert, but the fact that you've got half a dozen awards up there, I think that kind of clarifies it. I've just mentioned the fact that we are revisiting this subject, and you made some very stark warnings when we last spoke, but those warnings seem to be getting more stark as we're going along. We've just been talking off air for those that obviously weren't listening in on that. And one of the stats that you mentioned is in some instances we're 100 kilograms or almost 100 kilograms.
Yeah. So we'll talk a little bit later on about the proliferation of sort of electric cars now. And if we go to the worst example, and we'll see that a little bit later in the presentation, of an electric Hummer loaded with 5 occupants with some work tools in some of the car parks that was designed back in the 60s, we are 165 kg short of a catastrophic failure that the car will actually go through the floor or potentially could go through the floor. So we are getting to the point where we're really into a point where electric cars, plus the fact as the car parks get older and older, and we'll talk a little bit later about how they get older and how they start to fail, we're starting to get into a worrying trend. And even just a family electric car can be fully loaded with shopping, with some tools, with some things in the back, could be near 3 tons. So we get an awful lot of cars going up on a Saturday afternoon, car park's full, we've had the snow, we've got ice, we've got failure of the car park. We are now getting to the point where concrete can fail. Now, I've got about 30 car parks at the minute where we are managing or they are closing down because of failure. And I've got demolition contractors either on with or about to start. So you can see there that there's a lot of car parks at the minute starting to fail, just in the UK. I mean, I'm not overly sure how the rest of the world are doing, but there's a reasons why a lot of the UK car parks are failing, which we'll go through a little bit later on in the presentation.
I'll put the presentation up in just a second, but one of the things that we discussed on my show this morning was when you look at something like potholes in the road, they are considered to be a vote winner. So if you go along, if you're a local councillor and you go along and fix the potholes, you know, chances are you may be re-elected. Car parks are not like that. Car parks are potentially a vote loser, aren't they? Because you're going to have local residents up in arms and possibly the retailers that are served by the car park as well.
And now, I mean, a long time ago, originally, car parks were predominantly owned by councils. And then in the 70s, you know, post-war, the UK, what the councils wanted was to start to repopulate town centres. So what they decided to do was incentivise developers or shopping centres or car park companies to build car parks. So we'll talk a little bit about the lift slap technique of putting car parks up. Very quick, very straightforward. Slabs being put into car parks, but again, pre-70, pre-code, pre-building regs, pre-European codes, getting built and thrown up as quick as can, because we wanted to bring into the town centres car parks. So unfortunately, the councils and people now don't own the car parks. It's gone out to franchise. Certain car park providers will own car parks. And again, they're not getting the funding back. All the councils want is to make sure that the people come into the shopping centres to get done. So the car parks itself is a business. Yeah. And it's a lucrative business where people will do it. And car parks are great. We all park in car parks all the time. But what we've got to be careful of is the old car parks are now starting to fail because of several problems, which we'll talk a little bit later on through. So yes, I think the pothole cleaning up is certainly one. But if you think about a pothole and you think about a car park, same sort of problem. What causes a pothole? Well, water getting behind a little tiny failure in the road, which will then expand and contract due to our weather conditions. It will then loosen. Cars will go over it. It'll send it away, and it'll lift it up. We have the same problems in car parks, to some extent even worse, because how do we clear away the snow and ice? Well, we put down chemicals or we put down salt. Salt rots concrete, concrete rots into the metal. Over a 20, 30, 40-year period, it starts to rot, starts to fail, and it starts to eliminate the concrete away from the steel. That's our strength. Once our strength goes, we can have potentially a failure. And we have seen lots of failures in the UK car parks over the years.
I'm going to throw this one up. Obviously, we've been talking about electric vehicles, but I think Al Grierson makes a very good point here. More and more people are buying heavy SUVs, guilty as charged, instead of your standard 1960s VW Beetles.
So if I can go to Al's point there, in the UK, Al, we've got a Ford Max, or we've got a Honda CR-V. Current weight for the Ford S-Max is 2.5 tonne. We go to a Honda CBR electric with a gross weight of 3.5 tonne, with fully loaded with people and whatever. So, and then obviously people, got larger people, larger cars, 4x4s, SUVs. We're starting to get into those sort of vehicles going up, and we'll talk a little bit about. You mentioned there a standard 60s W Beetle. I've got a Morris Minor in my presentation. Morris Minor was 757 kgs. We're now talking about 4.1 tonne basic weight of a Humvee. Just under 2 tonne for a CR-V Honda, unloaded. So we've got a lot of weight going onto car parks that we didn't think we would have all those years ago from in there.
Yeah, and as Alice just said, well, that's exactly the limit. Yeah.
Okay, so you are right on. So Al, car parks were built to a limit of 5 tonne. We're now 165, potentially 165 kgs short of a car going through a floor or exerting huge amounts of pressure on the floor. And if you add it to 40 years worth of degradation of a car park, we're now starting to see what happened now. We had a failure in Nottingham a couple of years ago when one side of the car park failed, where all the cars were overhanging. It was cold, wet, a little bit of snow on the ground. It failed. So, and the other thing is, what you've got to bear in mind is if a car is left overnight, we have specific snows and ice. We hit huge amounts of levels on there. We've now got a potential point loading problem on the car park.
I'm going to put the slides show up in just a second, but this is one from Gary Muirhead. Do we need to start looking at roads and bridges? I believe we do. Maybe derating the weight limits on some bridges with all the weight of electric cars.
So I think Gary makes a great point. And one of the things that I think we need to look going forward, Gary, is I think we've now started to have HGV vehicles starting to look about going electric. Now they're talking about in the future of HGVs going electric. Now, what's that's going to add to the vehicle? I mean, I don't know, but I've started to do some research into it. Significant. So bridges, roads, anything that carries over them. Can you imagine over the old lanes and roads and culverts that we had in the UK? What sort of issue these heavy cars are going to have on it? Now, the other thing is, if a sat nav takes you the wrong way and it takes you down a road and it doesn't show a limit because the council or local authority hasn't assessed the weight loading of an electric car, I think we're going to have some potential problems moving forward.
It's worrying times. I'm going to throw this one up very quickly. It's another thing. I'm well shocked that since these electric motors come in, we haven't had a major failure yet.
I think that Dan makes a point. We haven't had one, and I think he uses the word yet. I think Dan, I think that's coming. I think when we've had the point loading failures on car parks in the UK, but that's with the standard car. That's many years ago. I think now as we move forward, we'll find one, and I think somewhere we've probably seen there's probably has been a failure, but it hasn't been brought to the media's attention. I think as we start to get larger and bigger battery ones, in the UK we're talking about no cars being made past 2030 being all battery. I think all will wait for them, and people like SUVs and bigger vehicles, I think we're going to start putting more weight and more load into vehicles. And the problem when we get a car park full of electric cars post 2030, and we've got a 65 to 70-year-old car park, I think then we've got a potential problem.
Right, I'm going to delay it no longer.
Okay.
Just to let everyone know, I'm going to take myself off the screen. I'm going to be controlling the slides behind the screen. I'm going to hand the whole thing over to Mike Kehoe and let him go through his presentation. So, Mike, I'm going to take Dan Cullen off the screen. It is now over to you, sir.
Okay. Thanks, Mark. Just a few slides as we go through on multi-storey car park demolition and some of the reasons why we've had a multiple of failures going forward, some techniques and some things that we'll need to look through going forward in the demolition industry. So, Mark, if you can go to the next one. So we're going to talk a little bit about the history of multi-storey car parks, predominantly in the UK, construction of multi-storey car parks, why and how they've failed. We're going to look a little bit about demolition techniques moving forward and what holds the car park together. So where's our strength points in a car park and how they've failed in the past and what would be good demolition moving forward. What would be a good practice if we've got a failing car park under demolition. Now, as Mark said before, kindly said I was an expert. I've been in the industry 40 years. I understand demolition, but one of the things that I really enjoy working on and something I have a passion for is concrete structures. And car park is something that I get asked a lot to do around the UK. I give a lot of advice around the world in terms of car park and car park structures. So hopefully I've got a feel for it. And maybe if as we go through any questions that you do ask, we'll stop at certain points. By all means, drop me a question and then hopefully we can understand it a bit more. So Mark, if you could go to the next one, please. Okay. Multi-storey car park's been around since 1901. Earliest multi-storey car park, as we can see here. Again, Botanic Gardens, Glasgow. A real grade, now it's a grade A listed building. We had, as I said before, a real expansion in car park design after the Second World War. The reason why that happened is the councils, local authorities, government wanted to re-energise town centres. Okay, so what happened was the government gave incentives such as very, very quick planning permission was granted. They wanted to build car parks in city centre locations, and it was built very, very quickly to re-energise city centres. So that's why we've had an awful lot of concrete framed structures after the Second World War. Concrete, why did we build concrete frame structures? As we talk a little bit later on, it was very, very quick, straightforward. It was an easy build to do, and it was something that we could source relatively straightforward post-war. So Mark, sorry, next one. Okay, so what's a simple construction from the car park? Well, here is a multi-storey car park being built early 60s. As we can see here, it's a lift slab. Okay, so what happened was we'd build the core, and we can see the big core down there in the middle on the right-hand side, build the core up, and then what we would build from the outside, and we would basically lift up and jack the concrete planks into place. Now, the problem with this is that we were relying an awful lot on gravity and the lack of movement back from the 1960s from there. So the columns erected, then each floor was jacked into position, fixed into place. Column heads were either inserted or a welding column a box was welded around the column to hold the slab in place. A number of car parks were also constructed using lightweight concrete planks, lifted into place and putting a dowel in place. So basically, when I talk about a dowel, basically a section there, section sits on top of it, and it would hold it in place. So put with a reinforcing bar. So we did have a situation, or we have got a situation, that a lot of car parks in the UK are built only being held in together by a dowel. No nuts, no bolts, no connections, no reinforcing welding together, no concrete overlaid. Effectively, a dowel bar is holding a car park into place. And again, at the bottom, we talk about there, cast slab structures of car parks have been cast using formwork. So another type of car park was where we'd cast it into place, lifting from a core place, stairwell. So we can see there that on our right-hand side, we've got a big tower. That's our core strength. And the rest of it there, we will build off a in-situ car park or in-situ building from in there. So we'd put some shuttering up there, we'd pour concrete in with some steel work in them. And again, bear in mind now that we're talking about pre-1970, where in the UK we had building regs came in 72, and we also had Euro codes come in at a later stage from in there. So Mark, if you could move on to the next one, please. Okay. Governments incentivized car parks. So why was there a huge build-up of car parks? Because the government made it really, really economically viable to build car parks. Lack of building regulations in place when early car parks were constructed. So as we work today with in the UK of building control and building regulations and design, we had none of that pre-1972. There has been, and there's been a number of questionable construction methods installed. We recently undertook a car park in Southend-on-Sea, where we found no reinforcing concrete inside of the structural columns. They were just cast in, and there was no steel reinforcing in them. So again, additional to pre-1972 factors: poorly constructed, poorly maintained, and deterioration of concrete frame and slab. If we've got a poorly built car park, it's then poorly maintained, it's then poorly surveyed, and then we then follow this on by the deterioration over time, because car parks are a money generator. We have a slight problem where we can then fail. Sorry, Mark, next one, please. Okay. A couple of environmental factors that's really, really playing heavy on us at the minute. Changes in global weather conditions. We see warmer summers, colder winters. Accumulation of snow and ice. So where we have a real problem with car parks is snow and ice. Mark talked a little bit before about potholes. Well, certainly we get any failure in a car park, bearing in mind we have no windows, it's open to the elements, we get a lot of water, we get a lot of accumulation of snow and ice. And as the car park freezes, it expands. And as it contracts, it then contracts again away. And then we have that on a seasonal basis. How do we get rid of the salt? How do we get rid of the snow and ice from a car park? Well, we use salt and chemicals. Salt and chemicals do start to erode the concrete, do start to go through the concrete, and then do start to erode the steel inside from in there. Okay. So we've got an awful lot of problems. And again, these cause the failure not only of the concrete, but of the steel in there. Now, what we've also found through my investigations and research into car parks, we've also had incorrect steel fabrication. We've also had the reinforcing, if it's an in situ, where they welded the wrong gauge of steel together. The weld has actually produced a failure on the steel, and it's not been fixed together. And also, at a lot of the car parks, we now have poor weatherproofing applied to the top floor. Obviously, then if the weatherproofing fails at the top floor, then we get an awful lot of water seepage all the way through. And we also have, if anyone sees a car park, if you go into a car park, we see that the internal drainage, or the drainage, is all internal. What happens if we have a failure of the internal drainage is that water seeps all the way through the car park, especially if it's poorly maintained. And then what happens is you have water and you have failure, and then we have expansion of concrete. We have a failure of the steel work, and then as we move forward, then we can have failure of the concrete. The next one, please, Mark. A bit of a twist of words on this one here. I think if you can see here, it says welding, a good example of bad welding. So basically, that's all that's holding in place either the lift slab or the planks being put in place. And that's all when we go and have a look at some of the car parks, all we can see is poor box sections around the column heads. So we can see there the column head on top of it, and that's the only thing that's holding that up. And what happened was, on many occasions, is the weld failed because they were welding to steel inside of the concrete. And what happened is they were almost welding steel to try and weld it to a small piece of steel inside of the column. So, and it tended to fail. And again, there was no checks, there was no building control, there was no third-party verification that the work was done correctly. It was done on the speed and a let's get this up as quick as we can from there. So we had an awful lot of failure around the column heads. Mark, next one, please. And as Mark rightly said at the start of the show, and some of the questions which were really clever at the start of the show, we've now got a rise in electric vehicles. Okay, and not only large but significantly heavier in some cases. Newer vehicles weighing over 5 times as much as their counterparts and the car parks were built for. When these car parks were designed in the 50s, 40s, 50s, 60s, nobody could ever have imagined that we would be going into electric cars in 30, 40 years time later. We also not realised how heavy the batteries would be. We've now got a bigger population. We've now got a heavier population. We now carry a lot more in our cars, and the cars are getting bigger. We've now got SUVs. We've got 4x4s. We've got all significant types of SUV type vehicles in there. Okay? And what we're doing is we're now starting to get soon to the maximum the car parks were designed for. Mark, if you can go to the next one. One of the ones that we talked about before, I think it was Al said, I think it was maybe, we said about initial Volkswagen Beetle. Well, this is a Ford Cortina on the left-hand side, 1962 to 1966, 787 kilograms. Right-hand side, 4,110 kg. So basically 4.1 ton, unloaded, okay? Actually laden, just under 5 ton. Just under 5 ton. And a lot of the car parks were built in the 50s and 60s and into the early 70s with a maximum weight per car park of 5 tons. So the designer thought there's no way that we're going to get nearly 6, maybe 7.5 times more weight in a car than a Ford Cortina, which you've got seen on the right-hand side there. And that was quite a heavy car at the time. We also had Jaguars in those sorts of times, but we were never getting beyond a ton. Now we've got a standard electric car that drives around with a family of 4 in at 2.5 to 3 ton. So we can start to see now that car parks are going to be put under immense pressure moving forward. And I think that's a concern if we take into account of the 50s and 60s, the poor maintenance, the change in the weather conditions, the environmental one. And the other thing is, I think the car park operators need to realise that this is coming very, very, very quickly. We get about 5 car parks a month come on our tables, and people ring us up and says, we've got a car park that we think is failing. Now, we've had some significant failures of car parks over the past few years. We've had the collapse in the last year, been taken down under demolition, but we've had failures where there's been actual cars and it's been operating. And car park operators need to understand, need to test, and need to get a regime in place where heavy cars with batteries, with poor weather conditions, with a failing car park, could be a recipe for disaster. Mark, sorry.
Okay, we're just going to take a very quick breather there, Mike, just before you press on. I had a couple of questions in here. Gary Muirhead says, are you inspecting any car parks strength in Scotland? That's probably to make sure that Gary, when he goes out shopping, he parks in a safe one.
Okay, well, the question to Gary is yes, Gary, because we're across the UK. We're in 4 cities in Scotland, and we have as you know, we have a base up in Scotland, so we're up there all the time. I'm actually there next week, looking at a car park, and I'm looking at a concrete frame building, an associated car park. one of the things that I would say, Gary, my wife now goes mad with me when I go into a car park, because I go into car parks and I can see them failing. And there's many car parks that I won't go in because I know that there's the potential for failure. And, you know, I also go and see a lot of clients, councils, car park operators, and with our structural engineering team, we go in and we say, look, you know, this is potential to failure. And you, Gary, if you go around wherever about in Scotland you are, you go into car parks, you look up into some of the old inner city car parks, I will guarantee you 99.9% of those car parks, you'll see the initial evidence of failing car parks, whether it be spalling concrete, whether you'll see reinforcing going through. We've got one in Norwich in a minute, and I went in and it was still live, and I turned around and drove out and went somewhere else. And I was there to do the inspection. And my advice to the client was, a week later, that this car park needs to be closed down. And we got the engineers there to do a pull test on the floors, and there was no strength whatsoever in the car park and floor. It's now subsequently been closed down, and I'm now putting together the scheme with the planners to get it demolished because it's unsafe.
I'll throw this one up very quickly. Tim Meany's just joined us over on LinkedIn. Good evening, all. Apologies for being late. No apologies necessary.
No.
Gary Muirhead says, is there a law where an unsafe car park can be closed indefinitely?
Yes, because what all local authorities have is a duty of care. So if a car park is deemed unsafe, council building control, council engineers, similar to any other building, can deem it unsafe. We've got a lot of car parks where the council don't own it, but the council has now stepped in and made sure that the operator closes it down because it is unsafe. So there's not a specific law on car parks. It's just that the councils and the local authorities and building control have a duty of care to ensure that if a building is unsafe, that they can close it down. And we've got, I said, I think I'm just talking to Angela here in the office. I think we've got probably 30 car parks under management, one way or the other. Either we're assessing, we're about to demolish, or we're now putting plans together to get further structural surveys on it.
I think that probably answers the question from Dan Cullen. Have you looked at car parks on the outskirts of London and in small towns? My guess is yes, you probably have.
The answer, Dan, is I don't know if it's me, but like I say, I have a passion for this type of structure. So a lot of councils and operators or contractors ring me up and ask us to do this. So we've got car parks in Ilford, we've got car parks in Norwich, we've got Cheltenham, Gloucester, Liverpool, we've got them up in Edinburgh, Aberdeen, Glasgow. So we're looking at a lot of ones from there. And again, there was no classification between where the councils gave the what's the word I'm looking for? The incentives to build car parks. It wasn't just small city centres. It was anywhere where they could generate it from there. I live on the Wirral. We've got 4 or 5 car parks here, which we're sort of 10 miles away from Liverpool, where we've got a number of failing car parks here because what happened is they wanted the town centre to be built up. So we had the smaller outskirts town centre. How to get lots of people into there was to build a car park. So the smaller outskirts is just as bad. Mark will tell you, there's quite a well-known collapse of a car park in just outside skirts of London that happened last year. Again, those are the ones that are starting to fail. So any small town centres, and the other thing is any of those centres that was built as a post-war boom town, such as things like Liverpool, we have Skelmersdale, outskirts of Manchester, all those post-boom towns, Luton, Watford, all those areas there, all wanted to drive traffic to the shopping centre. And how to drive shopping centre to it was to build car parks so people could come in quickly, park. And at the end of the day, in the 50s and 60s and 70s, multi-storey car parks were a new, unbelievable phase for town centre planners. So they would build them. I mean, I was in Cambridge doing a job for yesterday in Cambridge. There must have been, 6 or 7 car parks all around the town, but now started to diminish. So all of a sudden now the town centre plannings are different, but 50, 60 years ago, car parks were a huge draw to a town centre.
Got some great questions coming in here, people. Keep them coming. Dan Cullen says, with the additional charge points, is this an extra issue with structural changes?
You know, that's a great point. That's a great point, because if you start to put weight on, now if you think about it now, we're starting to put an extra charge point. So we've got weight. We're now designing an additional weight that wasn't designed for. Then we're putting large amounts of point loading of heavy cars into the same location every single time. Yes, I think we've got a structural issue.
Gary Muirhead says, what should we do if we see an unsafe car park? Is there a car park helpline as such?
Well, you can certainly call me, and I will and I will certainly tell the local authorities. But I would, if you see a car park and you generally feel it's unsafe, and I've done it, Gary, I have rang the local authority and the building controller, and I have said I've witnessed the car park. They do take heed a little bit for what I say, and I say, look, I've been in it. My background is demolition. We have structural engineers that work here. I believe it's starting to fail or spoil. I would definitely report it to them or the operator and say, what you will find from the operator is what's the word I'm looking for, without being too disrespectful, that you will not get a great deal of change back off them, because it's at the end of the day, it's a money making turnover. You know, if you think of the amount of money that car parks generate. But if it's a local authority one, or you speak to building control, yes, if you've got concerns, clearly take them. And I do it all the time, Gary. I'm certainly 4 or 5 times a year, I will ring a local authority or building control or their emergency structures and say, have you had a look at this?
Al Grierson says, all 1960s and 70s car parks here in Luxembourg are underground, and several are being modernised at the moment. Will there be a structural difference between an overground car park and one hammered deep into the rock?
Depending, Al, if a lot of the underground are 2-storey car parks and they were built on a slab, bear in mind at ground level and underground level, you're now sort of more liable for water ingress. If you can think about that into your basement, then there's no difference of what the sort of middle or bottom floor will be. And remember, Mark talked about the opening gambit before about potholes. Well, if it's a ground floor level and it's not structurally waterproofed, and the waterproofing is failing, as we know a lot of ones failed, you will still possibly get the same sort of failure on the top one. The bottom level, that is deep and cast into rock, possibly not, but we still might get a column point load failure around the column, because remember, in the 60s and 70s, your designers at underground car parks weren't designing for 4 or 5 ton vehicles. You were designing for sort of vehicles under a ton. So you got 5 or 6 times of going down there. And if you look as well, if you look back to the other guy's points about failing car parks, if you look at the ramps tend to fail as well, because you're on 2 different floors. So the ramp going down between one another floor, there's a failure at the top and there's a failure at the bottom, because what happens there is that it's been jointed. So the failure to go down. So we have to look at whether it be underground, overground, and any type of car park, there's potential for failure.
I'm going to put the slides back up in a second, but just a question from my point of view. All of this seems to stem from a point of lack of foresight. I've been doing this for quite a while, and I actually reported on the opening of several sections of the M25. And there were sections of the M25 that were built around the busiest city in the country, but they were built at 2 lanes because they were built on plans from the 60s. They've now gone to 3, 4, and in places 5 lanes. It is that lack of foresight. It's not looking far. I mean, electric vehicles, I think, have come out of left field, but there has been a lack of foresight here, hasn't there?
Well, I think the lack of foresight with concrete generally and concrete construction has been beyond belief to some of the things that we've seen. I mean, we were involved in the M20 when that bridge come down. We were called in by the highways agency to remove that. And the structural engineer said to me that. He said, don't worry about the base on that one, Mike. He said, when you do it, it'll be so thick, it'll be untrue. When I pulled it out, it was about 1/10 the amount of reined structure that I was expecting to find in there. South End car park, just for the guys generally know, if we have a column, so we'd have a concrete concrete structure column up in the air, fitted from there, we would expect somewhere between 3 and 4% of the column to be reinforcing. We've been on jobs where we've found no reinforcing in it. Now, as Mark knows, our third generation demolition man, grandfather and father in front of me, I worked in demolition, have brought me into the game. I've only ever done demolition. Father's great expression is, what happens on a Friday? And I say, what happens on a Friday, Dad? Well, the men want to go home. So do they want to put reinforcing in, or do they just want to lay concrete? So that's the sort of things that we have to bear in mind as well. And especially as we were before, loading and testing of the Euro codes, where we have building controls, we have regulations, and we sign off. They're the sorts of things that we do. But you'll not be surprised the number of car parks where we find no or limited amount of reinforcing in the columns.
Another question from Dan Cullen, who's on fire tonight. Should we be looking at having, say, electrical parking only on the ground floor, so the weight is not being on the levels above?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point, and the thing is the more myself and Angela in the office here with me today, we looked into this and started to research it, is the more frightened I'm actually getting about car parks and the weight of potential car parks. So I think what the answer to that is, I think the operators need to be aware of what's coming in terms of weight, what's the point loaded, and where can they charge these cars. I mean, to some point, the question, I think it was it from Dan there? Sorry, Mark. The question
it
from
was,
Dan.
yes.
I think Dan realizes that it should be assessed, Dan. You know, each floor should be assessed. You know, what happens if somebody makes a mistake and says, actually, I didn't realize it was just for ground floor, I went to the second floor. You know, we've got the car park industry now must understand about the need to understand the weight on these loads going on and what happens to us and how we get potential failure. I've
been beaten to the punch. I had a question saved up for later. I know there's been a big drive in America. They had a few bridges collapse, and there's been like a national inspection program over there, and it's found literally thousands of road bridges that are wanting. And then Tim Meany has just said, do we need an independent car park inspector to check against current conditions, reports supplied by car park owners in order to validate its safety? No one will slate their own property because of the potential costs involved. So yeah, do we need a national inspector?
Tim, you know, I would love to be able to be around where we could see a national car park inspector, and I think government, I think local authorities, I think building control, and I think the industry needs to get a grip and say, actually, who is inspecting this one? It needs to be independent, because if you've got, I'm not casting aspersions against the car park industry. You know, they do a great job. They provide car parks. But if you've got a money-driven one in the centre of London that's producing thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds worth of revenue a day, you're going to be quite low to close it down. And how many car parks have you been in? And the other one is back to, I think it was Al or Dan's point before. How many times have you gone to a car park and you see it being propped in certain areas?
Yeah, I've got one nearby me right now.
I've got a car park next to my son. Son's at following my footsteps. I was at university at John Moores. My son's at John Moores University, and his car park, 3/4 of it's propped, and they're using the other quarter of the car park. So who's saying that the 1/3 is fine and the other 2/3 are not fine? So I actually think Tim's point is a great point. I think somebody needs to say who that. Now they're supposed to be doing independent checks on the car parks, and they're supposed to be doing yearly checks. Now, yeah, I don't know who's doing those checks is the answer. And they should be, to me, they should be done more. So if in the demolition industry, say for instance, we were working in a man basket, that man basket has to be checked 6 months. A crane would have to be checked yearly. So we have 6 monthly checks. We're putting hundreds and hundreds of people in the car park every day.
Yeah,
I think we need someone to say yay or nay, don't you?
Yeah, it really is very worrying. I'm going to go back to your presentation now, Mike. So I'm going to get myself back out of here again. Let me throw this up. I'll let you have a very quick drink, and I'll throw that back on the screen. Yeah. Get myself out. I think you should be looking at the right bit.
Yeah, I can see it. I can see it now. Moving back on, chaps, generally most car parks are in failure when demolition has been undertaken or prior to being undertaken. They are by nature located in city centres and built-up areas, as we discussed before. And we're going to talk a little bit about strength points on buildings. So what do I look for as a demolition engineer for our strength points? Position of the lift shaft, stairwells, how they're located due to the nature of the car park, and where we've got some strength in that building. Okay. So remember, strength points are not located in the centre of the building. They're normally located towards one side or to the end. And one of the big failures that happened on a car park recently is that the strength points were at two ends and the middle failed. Okay. Large areas of the superstructure or of the structure are therefore unstable, and then has no internal strength point to the car park. So we'll look a little bit later on as we move slide, Mark, please. Okay. So how do we take down demolition car park or do demolition in the car park that's actually failing? So how do we look for? We look for how the loads are transferred through the floors. What, if any, backpropping is needed? How leading edges will be protected, how the materials will be removed down the slab levels, and how would you prevent catastrophic failure of buildings, i.e. when it's got scaffolding around it? And how would the scaffolding affect the demolition? Well, we've had a number of scaffolding collapses on demolition buildings over the last couple of years. So again, we'll talk a little bit about that there. And again, how would you demolish the building using the strength points? Okay, Mark, if you could go to the next one, please. Okay, so typical demolition there, as we can see, a top-down structure. So why is it called top-down? Well, we're going to start from the top and we're going to demolish on a floor-by-floor basis in a nice and controlled manner with the scaffolding around the outside. Now, what we've got to bear in mind in here is the scaffolding is purely there for access, purely there for protection of dust and materials coming out. It is not a temporary work strength from in there. So we're just using that there purely to enclose it, purely to ensure that any labour needs to go onto the outside of it and to make sure that we protect it from the outside. So then, fully sheeted off flame retarded monoflex. We've got a drop zone, where we would normally use a drop zone with the lift shafts where possible. If not, we'd create our own. And the materials would be removed on a floor-by-floor basis. Mark, if you can move on. Okay. This actually is a surprising one. This is a fairly new car park that we had to demolish. I'm talking within 10 years that had started to fail, and we had to put a backpropping system in place to keep the car park up, and obviously no car parks could go into there. So what do we need to do in terms of demolishing a building? Well, due to the nature of the car park, we may have to backprop it, and in some cases we use a sacrificial propping where we just have to keep the props in and hope that we can recover them, or if not, they'll just be sacrificial. They'll have to get broken and damaged, and we just have to leave it as is, so we can take it down from there. What should we do? One of the great points before, I think it was from Tim, to say, do we need structural advice? Yes, we need to make sure that we get proper structural advice when we demolish a car park. Car parks may become unstable during the demolition because we are removing strength areas or strength points. So therefore, we're going to move towards, or as I develop my building demolition techniques, is to go towards our lift shafts, our stairwells, any shear walls, or any preferred strength points that we have in there. And we can also make our own strength points by backpropping or putting an engineered solution in place. Yes, Mark, please, if you could. Okay. Well, certainly in the UK, I don't know what it's like over there in Luxembourg, but certainly in the UK, we've got the National Federation of Demolition Contractors have put in place a number of guidance for floor-by-floor or top-down demolition. So we've got some specific advice. We've also have BS 6187/2011, which is the code of practice for demolition. So it also has a large section from there. We've also got the EDA, and over in America, you've got the American Association have their go to practice for doing different types of top-down demolition. But certainly, it's a perceived technique which we go on a floor-by-floor basis. If you could move on, please, Mark. Okay. Also, what we can do from in there, we can see on the left-hand side, we're using blocks, and the reason why we use blocks on there is that they tend to be a lot more lightweight, less point loading, from there, and also less heavier than a traditional machine. On the right hand side, we're just basically using a bobcat to push material, soft strip material, down the lift shaft from in there. If you would, Mark, please. Okay, different type of technique. I know we're quite short of time, but this was a job that I was called into by a local authority and a demolition contractor who we know quite well, Mark Bryan from JBV. Warrington Borough Council called us in because the car park was failing. They've had to emergency close the car park in an emergency procedures because it failed. A bit like I think Tim's point before, asking it was independent. Well, they actually got a structural engineer to come and have a look at it. Deemed it was starting to fail, rang us up, and then we come in and we said, yes, we believe it's failing. Now, on this one, as opposed to putting scaffolding around the outside and doing a traditional top down, my suggestion was not to do that. My suggestion was to close the roads around it for a weekend, to get a JBV to get a number of machines, and we were going to take it down over the weekend and hit it quite hard to ensure. The reason why we've done that was because we thought the building was going to be into failure. Even going back to the strength points, we decided that the building potentially failed. And if we're putting scaffolders around the outside and scaffolding, to do it from there. So what we decided to do, if we decided to create an exclusion zone. Now, we do a lot of explosive demolition, so we're quite used to exclusion zones. So basically what we did, we created what we would put in place of an exclusion zone, 1.5 times the full radius of the car park. And we basically closed the roads for a weekend. Yes, a number of people weren't happy, but we did it in a 48-hour period from there. So, Mark, if you could move to the next slide. So we looked at the alternatives of the car park here, marked in yellow. So we decided that there was a potential that this would fail. We were quite confident that if the building would have stayed open for a lot longer, it would have come down. So what we did is we created an exclusion zone, marked in red. We closed the whole area off. And over the weekend, we brought in a large amount of plant machinery just to get it down safely on the ground. If you could go to the next one, Mark, please. So again, what we looked at a series of sequencing. So where we would start with the machine, and we would follow a sequence all the way down to make sure that we got to the point. So as you can see there on the bottom, we did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we went to the next section. We did 6, 7, 8, 9. So we kept the building in its strength points. Where do we look for our strength points? Well, we can see on the left-hand side between 6 and 7, we've got a stairwell. We've got some ramps, which we can see all the way through. And on the bottom right-hand side by number 31, we've also got another stairwell. So there's our strength points. So where we're going to work to, we're going to work from 1 all the way through the building back to our strength point at the very end, bring it down. Great thing about this, we've created the exclusion zone. If a catastrophic failure occurs, it's only going to fall back into its own footprint. What type of machines were we using? Well, we're using large, high-reach machines from in there with an exclusion zone, knowing that the failure, if it did fail, it wouldn't go towards the machine. So again, we de-risked the program from in there. We told the council that we'd be a weekend for it. They closed the roads. And in reality, it didn't really generally affect the area. Mark, if you could go on. And again, we can see here, it's actually me down there at the bottom there. So we started to monitor it from there. There's our sequences. We can see our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We can look at the left-hand side. We can see our strength point. And we can actually see the building will start to fail as we go through it. But we'll try and keep our strength points in place from there. Exclusion zone, all the materials successfully remained within its footprint. And one of the things that I have to say here, Mark, is going slightly off topic, is that what I say is if a council is strong enough with the building control, they'll listen to us and we'll close the road down. Why do we close the road? Because if it fails, the only thing that will happen is that we have to clear it up. What happens if we put scaffolding around the outside of that building? Well, we have an awful lot of men working at height. 2005 working at height regs says clearly avoid. The scaffolding will actually not give us any structural support if that building fails. It would just collapse and make it more of a mess. So do away with men working at height. Do away with scaffolding. Just have the sort of, I'm going to try to use the right words here, have the right authority and take a grip and close the roads. Ensure that the roads fails from in there. And
it's an interesting point you make there, Mike. Sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah, no,
that's. I know when we had a spate of scaffold collapses over a period of about 12 months, maybe 2 years ago, there was that concern about the fact that local authorities would prefer not to do that. They would rather keep the roads open, particularly when it's serving a shopping centre. They're resistant to closing roads, when in actual fact, the easiest and safest way, close the road, push the whole thing on itself, reopen the road, and the demolition can take place very, very safely.
Okay, so I'm a little bit older in the tooth now, and I no longer sort of say to clients, well, yes, I'll do anything you want, Mr. Clients. Well, I actually won't now. So what I say to clients is, and local authorities and people in these buildings, not just car parks, close it down for the weekend. We've got 8 bank holidays a year in the UK. So if it's on there, let's close it down of a bank holiday. Let's close it down overnight. So, and they look at me and say, well, no, we don't. Well, let's just close the roads for footpath for one 48-hour period, and everybody's safe. Yes, we've got to do demolition. Great. We need to reconstruct the town centre or the city centre, but let's just close the road down for 48 hours, get 2 machines in there, knock it down, put it on its backside, leave it away, come back and clear it up behind the hoardings, and everything's nice and safe. We spend 6 to 8 weeks putting the scaffolding up. Then we bring it down on a floor by floor basis. That's not, if it's in the city centre, we have no option, well, we have to do it floor by floor. But in other ways, a lot of demolition contractors then will start demolishing it with a high reach. A plank goes out the wrong way, or a truss goes out the wrong way, or a column fails. And remember, these are held up by dowels. This car park here is only held up by one piece of metal going up in the air, coupled by a male and female joint, holds it in place. If it fails, or there's no reinforcing bar, that whole section will fail.
I guess my next question on this is, if you're talking about a structure that is fundamentally flawed, it's lost its integrity, it's now fragile, that must be an additional challenge for the demolition contractor, because it throws in unpredictability to a degree, isn't it?
Yeah. So that more than ever, we need to produce an exclusion zone. So what I mean, we've been working with Norwich recently. We've got a failing car park there. We've got an unusual one. We've got a cantilevered car park. So I can't take it down in a step process. I've got to take it flush by flush by flush. So to do that, I've got to restrap the building. I've got to put some engineering solutions in place to make sure that when the building comes down, it remains stable. So that's what we're looking for from there. But what I've said to the local authority is if you want me involved, it's a 52-hour closure of this car park. All the roads around it, and the shopping centre and the area. We can move the shopping centre shoppers to the other side. They can come another way. We'll do the work of a night. We'll close it down, but we're not having pedestrians anywhere near this one. Because if it does fail, it falls down. We sweep up, we clean up, we move away, and we're not in the newspaper. We do it the other way. We have a catastrophic failure. Somebody gets killed. Everything goes in there, and for the sake of a 48-hour road closure.
I'm going to let you get back to.
Okay, so we can see there we've created an exclusion zone. We've started to knock the car park down. And Mark, if you can move on to the next slide. Again, there's us working overnight. Again, road closures, sealed off them in there. Yes, it was close to the town centre, but we managed to get a traffic management system in place. We gave 10 weeks notice to all the people around there. They had plenty of notice from in there, and we moved it around. Next one, Mark, if you could. And that's pretty much the scene late on Sunday afternoon. We'd actually finished a lot earlier. We'd actually got it down nice and safe. And I think that's sort of around about 2 o'clock in the afternoon on the Sunday. We then closed the site off. We brought it back in. We opened the roads and we got the shopping centre. We actually got some traffic and footfall back into the shopping centre early on the Sunday. So it can be done. It can be done quicker, easier, and actually less headache to the local residents, shop owners, or to the council if you do it that way. So my philosophy now is to always, where we can, produce an exclusion zone. Okay, Mark? Again, this is just an indicative photograph of modern techniques where they're putting planks against the core. So what we try and do on the old ones is to remove the planks, and obviously there's a core from in there. And what we do tend to find, if the core or the plank has not been built properly, is that it's prone to failure. Sorry, Mark, if you could move on to the next one. So this is one of the car parks that I was called in. This is in someone puts about in city centre. This is Hammersmith in London. So we can see here that we've got where the free sign is. We've got a column, and we've got two large, I don't know what you call truss planks sitting across there, sitting on the concrete. Now, what's happening there is that's only sitting on by about an inch, and is actually supposed to be doweled in. So there should be a dowel in there, but actually there wasn't a dowel. There was only one very, very small piece of reinforcing bar holding the whole place up. And you can start to see the planks failing. And when we got there, the vast majority of the car park was starting to fail. Mark, if you can move on. Okay. Car park was live previously to understate on this one. And then as it started to come down on the demolition, the whole car park failed. No reinforcing in there. So what we are renowned for now for car parks is we now know we have actually got evidential comparisons to show that car parks under demolition can fail. Not for the fault of the demolition contractor, the fact of poorly constructed standards from in there. So when I go to the local authority or to the people owning the building and say, look, please, sir, can I have a road closure? We can now point back to factual events where car parks have failed under demolition because the strength points have failed or there's no reinforcing in the building from in there. To keep that in place, we would have to put huge amounts of backpropping. We would have to do an engineered solution, and we're now getting to the point where we're putting large amounts of people and engineering work into a car park that we know, or a building that we know is failing. So therefore, we can look, we've got support and evidence to say, look, we need the road closure. We need to bring it down slightly different from in there. Okay, Mark, if you can. Again, going back to that car park in Hammersmith, we actually touched that top plank, and basically a whole section of that building car park failed. We had the high reach out the way, but we actually started next to the stairwell, which was a strength point. So again, good practice, get good structural advice. We had a good structural engineer. His exact words was, when you touch this, I expect a large section of it to fail, which it happened. Create exclusion zones, use mechanical machinery where possible. If it does fail, it will only fall down in its own situ or footprint. Let's take away our operative safety. Let's make sure that everyone is safe when they go to work. Mark, if you could go to the next one. Again, different deconstruction techniques that we have used in the past. Okay, we have taken down concrete planks. There is a very, very unusual one on the left-hand side, is that it was a very, very strange and wooden car park that we had on a very, very early stage where they actually used a wooden technique for the car park for the strength of it. And on the right-hand side, we've taken down the internal car park and we've left the external up with a facade retention. So a really different types of deconstruction techniques around car parks from in there. Mark, if you can. I don't know if this will play, Mark. I don't know if the video will play on this one, but what we've also used a lot of car park ones is we've used a lot of explosive demolition to demolish car parks. Again, very, very quick. And the problem with the only downside of doing demolition of car parks is that when they do go and they fail, they tend to collapse very, very quickly from in there. So we have to be careful when we do any pre-weakening and get some good structural advice from there. I don't know if that will play, Mark. By the looks of it, not playing it, it might not show, but maybe we can show that another time. If you can move on then, Mark. So what do we do with explosive demolition? It's a very, very quick way to demolish a car park. Significant time is required for planning. And when I talk about planning here, I'm talking about structural planning as well. Really difficult. And if you have to do a test blast, which is really difficult on a car park, because if we have to take a section out, we have to really go back and reinforce the building up. And I'm loath to do test blasts now on car park because we know it's starting to fail. So what we do is in certain areas is that we'll go and try and replicate or try and understand what's inside of it. And then one of the techniques that we do now is we feather scan. So what we'll scan the car park itself to see what materials in there. Is there any reinforcing in there? Have we got any sort of have you got 1%, 2%, 3% of the column is reinforced? And what we can also do is some localized pull tests to understand what we've got. Certainly, we need to get local authorities involved. We need to get statutory authorities involved as needed as well, HSC, the explosive unit as well, to ensure that we understand what we're doing for demolition. But what we do with explosive demolition is that we create a large exclusion zone and effectively bring it down from in there. Okay, Mark, if you can. One of the big problems we have with explosive demolition is we need to make sure that we've got really good understanding of the load paths. We talked about a test column and the difficulties of doing a test blast on a column. We've also put together where we've put wire ropes together around the outside, and we implode the middle, and then we bring the car park in on itself. The wire ropes will pull the car park, the outside structures, and we'll pull it in from inside from there. We've got awful lot of many thousands of tons coming down, so we bear in mind that we're in the town centre. So we've got live services that we need to protect. We've also possibly had the evacuation of local tenants. We have to put a geotex preparation around it. So anything that flies off, fly off, we can protect it. Air overpressure. So what happens there if you've got a cardboard box and we press it down, the air will push out. Exactly the same in the car park. We get a lot of fly of pressure going from there. And we also make sure that the HSC are informed where the site during the demolition from there. So again, explosive demolition is certainly a really good technique, but local authorities are really, really low to use it in their town centres. Why? Because every single space in the town centre is built on, and a lot of buildings are joined up together, hence why we have a problem with explosive demolition. Mark, if you could. Okay, advantage of demolition though, it takes about 8 seconds from pressing the button to being on the ground. Building is made safe immediately. Problem we have is we've got to drill a lot of holes for the explosives. So are we going to pre-weaken the building? There's been a lot of talk in the demolition industry over the last few years about should we pre-weaken buildings? And that's what we need to make sure, because sometimes they can be prone to catastrophic failure. We're going to have to put a lot of sacrificial props in. It becomes expensive, time consuming, and we also have to put additional protection things as straw bales, shipping containers may be needed to protect other ones from there. I'm over in Dublin at the minute, and we've just been called in recently. We've got a 40 metre high building, and we've got a car park associated with it from in there. And one of the areas that we need to protect is the local area. So what we're doing is we're putting some straw bales, we're putting some shipping containers, 1, 2, 3 on top of each other. And what we've also done in the past with explosive demolition is that we've pulled the wires in the legs around the containers. So as the building comes down, the wires will pull the containers in, so it will contain the blast from in there. So a number of techniques that we've used in the past from in there. Explosive demolition looks great, a lot of planning, very nerve-wracking to make sure we get it right. If it goes wrong, it can cause a lot of problems from there. But generally, get the load paths right, good structural engineering, explosive demolition in car parks is a really good way to do it. Mark, if you could. Okay. So I hope I haven't bored you so far with my strength points, but when as a demolition engineer, when I go into a building, I always look for strength points. Stairwells, great strength point. Next one, please, Mark. Lift shafts. Why? Because they're generally concrete framed. Shear wall, very, very strong. So again, holding the lift shaft, so it needs to be designed and robust. Next one, please. Shear walls. Okay, we can see a foundation. We've got it says on the picture on the right hand side, we've got a really strong RC shear wall. Again, somewhere where we can go back. It's designed to be in strength. It's designed to hold the building up. So when I look how to create a demolition, I always look to where's our stairwell, where's our lift shaft, have we got a shear wall? How's that related to? Have we got a larger foundation that's holding the shear wall up place? Can I work my strength back to these points? Can the rest of the building come down safely, but the strength points be in place? That's what I look for. Next one, Mark, if you could. Okay. And again, a lot of car parks and now we're joining to other buildings. So what is next to the building? Do we need some external supported structural walls? If we take a building down, how's it going to affect next door? how's it going to affect the building next door? So how's the strength points of the building I'm going to take down going to affect with the car park? So these are the things we need to look for when we do our pre-planning techniques. Yes, Mark, please. Okay. Unfortunately, we don't get these strength points of a big concrete core inside of car parks, or very rare. What we tend to do on the new modern ones is we tend to get them to be in steel, and there seem to be strong points of design from in there. So, but they will go back to a lift shaft or a stairwell. But we can see on a really, really strong building, on a new build, as we see there, we've got the strength points located in the concrete core. Mark, please. Okay, good practice for demolition. Okay, pre-demolition advice required for all demolition. Seek suitably qualified structural engineers. There's some great demolition consultancy companies out there. There's not just ourselves. There's some great demolition structural engineering practices that deal predominantly in demolition. Really good. But pick your structural engineer correctly. Ask them, have they had any advice? Have they done any types of demolition before with structural car parks? Have they carried out temporary works? Some great structural engineers there for doing permanent works, not always great for doing temporary works. We as demolition engineers, we look at temporary works because we're looking to hold something up just long enough for it to fail. And I think we need to use that word fail a lot in demolition because we're looking for the building to design to fail, okay, in a controlled manner, but that's what we're looking for it to do. Pre-demolition advice, okay, carry out structural tests and floor loadings. Look to find out how the structure was reinforced. Do we need to ferric scan it? Do we need to do some core testing? Do we need to do some drills? Do we need to do some pressure tests? Is the reinforcing failing badly? Is there any punch and shear failure, i.e. column, head on top? Is the column punching through? Are we looking for the failure? Implementing structural engineering. So for any of our car parks, and I think Tim made the point earlier on, do we have independent ones for car parking structures? Probably not. But do we going to get good independent structural advice for taking down a car park? Absolutely. We need good demolition structural advice before we start to demolish the car park. Yes, Mark? Okay. What questions need to be asked for we're doing demolition of a car park? Is the car park in imminent failure? Okay. If demolition commences, would a catastrophic failure happen like we had in Southend in 2011, where we actually found there was no reinforcing in there? Would a full exclusion zone surrounding the structure be required? Yes, it may be. That would be our preferred methodology. Next one, please, Mark. Okay. Good practices for demolition. Let's look at the structure. Okay. Believe it or not, that is a car park leg on the right-hand side. That is now in failure. It's starting to spoil. The car park was actually open when that was initially first found. On the right-hand side, we see starting to water failure of the water ingress, and then we start to see little hanging down underneath the column of water icicles coming down. We can start to see cracks failing in the concrete. Next one, please, Mark. Okay. Again, good practice when we look into it. Does the car park need to be propped immediately? As we see on the next slide, if you could go to the next one, Mark, sorry. We see here that was a car park being undertaken from DDS. Now, DDS and their engineers all of a sudden realised that as soon as they would take out start demolition, that the building would fail. So they created column heads on top of the column to support the slab underneath it. Significant piece of engineering. A lot of work to be done prior before the demolition, but they would have had the catastrophic failure of the building. So the engineer quite rightly said we need to create some sacrificial column heads to make sure it doesn't fail, and that's what they've done, and they've done it down there. So good demolition advice from in there, and we credit DDS there for doing good pre-demolition structural advice. Next one, please, Mark. Again, this is what car park there getting prepped for demolition. Okay, they're putting some maybes and some shore jacks in there to prevent the floors moving, and to basically make the box slightly more rigid when it comes to demolition. Again, next one, please. Okay, so what do we look for? Again, what questions need to be asked? Ascertain any strength or loss of the concrete. So we can do that by core tests. We can then take a core sample, we can pressure test the core sample to see what strength's in there. Ascertain it by doing x-rays. Move on, please, Mark, if you could. Okay. Simple core test, simple ferrous scanning. Okay. What do we think a core test will cost? Probably about £100 to take a core sample. What do we think to drill a core sample? Maybe another £100. So for a few £100, we can see what our floor says. We looked for a square metre of the floor to be tested. Again, not a huge amount of money to ferrous scan a floor. How often do we see these to be done? We see very, very, very little of these testing to be done. So one of the questions was, how can we test the floors before to ensure that we're in good order? We can do some core samples. We can do some testing. We can ferrous scan to see what is available from there. So very, very simple test and not an awful lot of money to do it. Next one, please, Mark. Okay. Good practice for demolition. Well, we know demolition and car parks are affected by weather conditions. We know, and one of the questions was, do we get good structural advice and maintenance? Well, the answer to that is we know we don't. Car parks were put under tremendous stress with heavy loads. We're now loading them with heavier cars. We've now got more climatic changes. We've now got snow, ice. We've now got hotter summers. Well, you know, in the UK last year, we had a really, really hot summer. We're expecting to have another hot summer. Suddenly, there we're into a number of different areas and changes from there. We know lift slab car parks are prone to collapse due to the nature of the design and the open spans allowing for car parking. If you could move on, Mark. I don't know if you'll coming. And we can start to see here, I forget who asked the question when you go into car parks. Well, certainly that's a live car park. We can see it spalling. We can see the rust coming through. We can see from in there. And what we've seen recently is underneath on that car park there is that the whole of the reinforcing rod actually fell out and actually hit a car. So we can start to see them failing from there. And when we go into car parks now and we look and we see them, we will see that going forward. The next one, please, Mark. Okay. I don't think this is going to play, Mark, so I think we need to move on to the next one. Sorry. Okay. So that's us. We think we're a little bit of experts in the art of specialist engineering. And I think we're nearly at the end of our presentation and hopefully that we can, if there's any questions, and I hope that anyone's found it informative, and I hope if there's any questions, I can certainly answer some questions.
I had one here from Gary Muirhead again. Judging by the sound of some of these car parts, it will not take much to bring them down. One of the things that occurred to me with this is, what will it take for local authorities or the government to act? Do we require a collapse?
Okay,
and so, possibly, you know, people to be injured. But then we've already had that, haven't we?
So I have to sort of choose my words carefully here. One of the recent collapses, and the video shows of the car park collapsing, and let's not name it, but I think most people can see it on YouTube. About 2 minutes before the collapse, a young mum and her child in a pram walked past. A car went past a couple of seconds before it came down. We dread to think what would happen if that had happened 5 minutes earlier or 5 minutes later. Now, what will happen is, I think everyone's going along blasé, thinking this is okay. But what's going to happen now, Mark? I'm not going to sort of say how well you and my former owner and colleague John Woodman said about Turkey, but did you not have a conversation 8 years ago about buildings under potential earthquakes?
We did.
So we terrible to say that we are today looking at 30,000 people horrifically, you know, killed by the earthquakes and the earth moving from the tectonic plate there. But, you know, have we learned our lessons? Are we learning our lessons from there? God forbid the car park failed on a Saturday afternoon full of shoppers.
Yeah.
And that's the bit that is a worry to everybody. Now, one of the great questions for that, I think it was Tim, sorry, was should we be inspected? Absolutely. Should we be a number of ones be inspected on a regular basis? Absolutely. Should there be findings be posted to say this car park is safe and ready to go? Absolutely. But we now are in a precedent where car parks we know are failing. So we need to get them tested, and we need to understand why and where they will fail. And I think now we are into sort of 60s. We are now getting 50-year-old car parks that are really bad. And we know concrete has got a shelf life.
Yeah, we haven't even mentioned things like, and I know this came up in the bridge discussion over in the States, things like concrete cancer. You know, that is a real thing.
That is a real thing that I, as a demolition engineer, encounter on a daily basis. What is it? It's poorly constructed. It is the wrong thing. What I did touch about is one of my research papers that I did for some work I'm doing now for the clients is that the welding inside of concrete actually started to spoil and fail the metal inside of the concrete, and it actually started to fail immediately. It was welded together. So they used the wrong rods, they used the wrong metal, they used the wrong concrete. So immediately that was put together, that building was starting to fail. Now, you know, I think sometimes we say there goes but the grace of God. I think we are in the point where there goes but the grace of God, but we actually know what's happening. So my life is spent, you know, making sure people are safe on demolition sites and making sure the right methodologies is used. I think we just got to stand back and look at these car parks, because I go onto some of these car parks and they're not going to they don't take much to come down. The question asked, do they take much to come down? No, they don't. They fall down quickly, and they go quickly. And I've got one at the minute in London. It's 9 stories. Sorry, it's not more. It's 11 stories high with 2 stories above. And I'm looking at it, and me and the structural engineer are really worried how we're going to get this down. So the fact that, you know, I'm quite nervous about how I'm going to redesign this to come down safely, because it's like a Jenga. We take something down wrong, this will fail. Virtually on the inspections that we did, none of the dowels were present. So the only thing holding that building up is gravity, and it's inner city London. So, you know, we've got a situation there where we're really thinking hard how I'm going to get this down. And they also castellated the concrete, so basically cut holes in the concrete so they could make the span longer. Yeah, it's a worry for me.
It's a particularly frustrating thing, I think, from a demolition standpoint. But when you think how heavily regulated demolition is, and yet you've got, as you say, you know, however many thousands of multi-storey car parks across the UK, all of which are potentially putting hundreds, thousands of lives at risk day in, day out, and yet nothing.
Yeah, I think one of the points was raised tonight. Should it be inspected? Yes. Does the owner have a duty of care? Absolutely. Does the local authority have a duty of care? Yes, it does. My frustration as a demolition engineer is why do we persist to put scaffolding around buildings that have a potential to fail and collapse and go out? Close the road down. Look, the demolition contractor didn't build it. The demolition contractor didn't say, I'm going to poorly construct this building. Demolition contractor has got no drawings, no as-built drawings. He's got to go in and redesign the sequence to bring it down. He's putting his own team and men at risk. The local residents, close it down. Look, when we have a great royal event or a great something else, we can close roads down. When we have a garden parties or an event, we can close the road. When we've got a dignitary coming, we can close a road. Surely we can close a road for demolition people to take a building down safely over a weekend. As I said, we've got 8 bank holidays. I think we get an extra one this year, haven't we, with the coronation? We've got 9 bank holidays from in there. 4 days with the right amount of plant and machinery, a demolition contractor can do a lot of damage to a building, put it on its ground, put it down safely, and once it's underground, it's relatively straightforward. Please, demolition contractors, don't shout at me to say, once it's on the ground, it's relatively easy to process. But it is relatively easy to process. My philosophy, if it's on the ground, it's not working at height, it's not a danger, we're good to go. That's the worry from in there. Let's not go buildings high from in there. Let's work at ground floor level where everybody is safe. and let's have the kahunas, if that's a technical word. I was looking for another word. Let's have the kahunas to say to people, actually, no. And I've walked away. So from contracts, when I've said to the client, I will not go down the route of putting scaffolding around that building. And 2 of the buildings I walked away from collapsed. So there goes you're saying. And one of the ones, as we went through, a pedestrian wasn't hurt, but a piece of steel landed between 2 ladies walking down the road and took their shopping bag. Wow. So that's how lucky they were. So we are at the point, Mark, where we have not had a significant failure and the fatality of a passerby. But I think if the local authorities and stakeholders who have these buildings, they're not allowed us to take it down without having to put scaffolding in place. Okay, and the NFDC have done a great video, and they're working really, really hard to ensure that the scaffolding is used in the correct manner, and that's what it needs to be mindful, in the correct manner to be used for. But ask any demolition man, honestly, if they would prefer to get a high reach, bring it down without putting scaffolding up, bring it down in a controlled manner, and bring it down with the road closure. Yes, they would.
Mike, I realise there's a big football match taking place tonight. Yes, there is a big football match tonight. I'm going to. We've just had a hello from somebody over in France. It says hello to you, gentlemen. I think he must be talking to you. You're the only gentleman I can see, but thank you very much indeed for joining us. Okay. Al Grierson has said, thank you so much. That was really interesting.
I appreciate the questions, Al. I really do. And if there's anything I can help with in the future, put anything through to Mark, and I can always try and help them in there. I've got a number of car parks structures from in there that I worked on.
I guess my final question, and I've actually chosen my final comment from Gary Muirhead, but my final point, we've been talking a lot recently about this notion of embodied carbon, and this resistance to demolition, and demolition is the last resort and all that sort of thing. Do you think that is actually potentially adding to this reluctance to deal with car parks?
Okay, so as you know, Mark, I lecture a lot around the world in terms of car parks. So the first thing I say to people, to the construction industry, is I get on the slide and say, actually, where's demolition contractors don't produce any waste, and sit down. And they usually look at me and think, what is this guy on about? Well, we actually don't do it. So we actually handle the waste that we're given. So we go to site. There is a building. There's 20,000 ton of car park concrete on there. So much timber, whatever, flooring. What we do is we take it down, we sort it out, and we take it away. So the notion that we are a waste producer is wrong in my opinion. We as a demolition industry, and I'm a consultant now, no longer a contractor, we regularly hit 90% plus, and a lot of contractors, some of the really good contractors out there, are hitting 96, 97, 98% of reusing of the materials. Now, I think it's a mindset, Mark, of what people don't understand about lecturing. Now, there was a poor guy recently on LinkedIn, I don't know if you've seen it, where I got involved in, who made that same assumption that we as an industry do not recycle. And he got slaughtered because people don't realise how much it costs to tip demolition waste. So we recycle, reuse, we're sustainable. We've got a demolition degree, a master's degree. It's all about demolition and sustainability because we want to recycle materials. I think if clients talk to people like myself, the NFDC, the Institute of Demolition Engineers, I know yourself have been brought onto the press and media to talk about it. We don't produce waste. We handle it, we sort it, we remove it, and we put it into places for reuse. Today, I've been one of my big clients is Cannock Council. Cannock Council, very sustainable, looking about a complete structures of how we knock it down. We're going to recycle 98% of their materials, and it's going to be reused and it's going to be sustainable. And that's a car park, and that's a really, really big car park. So, from our point of view, I think clients need to and the bit about, well, we've now had the reverse techniques out. Someone else has come out and said, actually, demolishing buildings and making way for the future is a better way than leaving it there. How many times have you walked into own towns and cities and we see old decaying buildings from in there? They'll never get reused again. Take them down, redo them from in there. And remember, we recycle really, really well as an industry, and we don't produce waste. Now, construction regulation says that you must recycle more than 70% because a construction company or society is bringing materials to it. It's having offcuts, it's having recycling from in there. We as an industry are given what we're given, we move it, and we take it away and we source it from there. So I think that whole argument is a little bit of a paper talk to make someone to make a conversation point. I disagree wholeheartedly with that view of the demolition industry. I think we're a really, really sustainable industry. I think we recycle it. We take about car parks. A car park, very little asbestos in there. We'll recycle 99% of that product in there.
And as Mick Norton has just said, recycling 98% is a magnificent achievement. I mean, I honestly can't think of another industry that has bought into recycling and reuse and repurposing in quite the same way. We could teach the entire world.
I think if you was a contractor and you didn't invest in, look at Ride Demolition investing heavily into plants and machinery. You look at other companies that have recently gone into crushing plants. Look at Collard's, huge amounts of recycling. I mean, I would imagine Collard's turnover, a lot of it's down as the recycling from in there, and the demolition is almost peripheral to bringing in the products because they recycle fantastically well from in there. So any product that comes off their site is recycled, reused. Imagine someone paying you to take a building down, and then you can recycle it and again get paid again.
Sell it back to them, yeah.
And sell it back to the clients as a piling mat, as a crushing, as a car park. We've got a couple of car parks just outside London where the client wanted to come down, take the car park down, crush it back, and then reuse a low level one because they're scared about the car park falling down. So we as the industry recycle it. We're really, really good at it. We struggle with asbestos, but now there's a technique to recycle asbestos. It's not great on our carbon footprint, but we're starting to do better. So all of a sudden now we will improve. But yes, we are. And I know some people that look at us and say headline figures of 96, 97%. But yet we then produced we now know timber goes to energy to waste plants. It gets recycled down. So you can use the timber. We're now recycling plasterboard to some extent to go back and to be reused into certain processes. Yes, it's a little bit more expensive, but we are starting to do that. We know metal, computer flooring. We know we can take the timber out of the computer flooring. Or as a job I've just been recently on, we're talking about sustainability. We had 25,000 square foot of computer flooring. I went across to the site across the road and said to the guy, "You're not using any computer flooring, are you?" He said, "Yeah." So he said, "What was it?" We're doing 400 by 400 squares, exactly the same mixed. Took the recycling, hit his BREEAM targets, fantastic. Everyone's happy. I'm still waiting for my huge amount of fee for going across the road, but I'll just take the fact that I've saved a little bit of the planet on that one. So we're a really good industry. NFDC, IDE, our general contractors, are really, really good at recycling.
We've got a few of them in the chat, actually. Ian Martin's here. I'm going to go back to there. Ian Martin has just said, great presentation, Mark.
Yeah.
Mike, quite agree. Our friend Anthony has just said, thanks, Mike. Very informative.
Well, I know. Going back to Anthony there, Anthony Horrow, I work with Tony on many projects, and they're some great ones where they used to reprocess an awful lot of 6F2. And we'd process it, we'd put it onto sites from there, and we can then produce the piling mat for the piling mat going through. So again, what we've got there is when I work with Tony on a lot of the big schemes in London is city centre, London town city centre, is that we can then provide a complete workplace for as soon as we walk off, the follow-on contractor can come on with the piling mat, start working straight away. And 100%. You can imagine the cost. I've just said this today: £50 a ton of virgin stone, or you can have the stuff that's already on site to do exactly the same problem. So to do exactly the same information. So we don't need to go and bring huge amounts of stone in. We've got the same processes on site. We can crush it. We can produce a polymer. Demolition contractors are fantastic at producing pile of mats now. Why? Because it's a big number for them at the end of the project. So they want to produce that pile of mats. They don't want to take it off site. Could you imagine the sense of London, Mark? You're taking down a building and you've got 400 wagons outside.
And they'd still be there about 3 hours later, given London's roads.
Because they do 2 loads a day. So yeah, I think we're pretty good on the sustainability side of everything there.
Tim Meany's just said, thank you for a well put together presentation, sirs. That's
thank
down
you, Tim.
to Mike, obviously. Our friend over in France has just said, from one country to another, points of view and the rules are not the same. But the building techniques and the materials will be exactly the same.
Yeah, and I think I'm really impressed with the French demolition industry, and the construction industry has different codes, and obviously they're ahead of us in terms of asbestos removal because they're a lot tighter on the amount of what they do for the asbestos. So I'm really impressed with that. But yes, those car parks were an American design that were brought over to Europe in the early 50s and 60s. Car parks are no different. There's car parks in France. And we heard from in there, I think from Luxembourg, where we're still affected by rain, wind, snow, sun, heat movement, and we're unaffected by the same problems from in there.
Right, Mike, I'm going to let you get back to the football. I'm going to thank you very much indeed for being here. Really appreciate the input.
And Mark, if any of the listeners have a particular subject in demolition that they would like to listen to in, say, another couple of months, where I do another one, and I can certainly put one together on that one.
The door is always open, and I'm going to leave you with this. You can feel free to comment, but I think this is the way we play out the show. I'm going to start looking above and around myself when walking around a car park now.
Yeah, me too.
I think you already do, but I think you've got a convert.
Yes, well, yeah, Gary, I've got plenty of photographs to show you about car parks if you want to see some photographs related on a car park.
The Mike Kehoe horror show, brilliant.
Yes, it is. Yeah. Okay. A lot of safe ones out there. Then, thanks very much, guys. I really appreciate it. Enjoy the football, and I'll speak to you soon.
Many thanks indeed, Mike. You go off, and I'll say goodbye to everyone. But thanks very much indeed.
Cheers, guys. Thanks, everyone.
And that will just about do us. Rather longer than I expected, 1 hour and 31 minutes, but I think you will agree that was extremely valuable. There is a message there from Mick Norton. Sorry, Mick, we didn't get that there in time. But there you are. Ian Martin has just said there are a suite of tests that can be undertaken to ensure that it is free of contamination. Thank you very much indeed for that, Dan. Right, people, I've got an early start tomorrow. I also want to catch a bit of the football as well. So please go and have a fantastic evening. I'll be back here again for the Breakfast Show, 10 a.m. tomorrow morning, as per usual. Hope you enjoyed that. Obviously, this will be available for replay over on Facebook, on YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, wherever you care to find it. So if you'd like to share it with any of your friends or colleagues, please just direct them to one of those. Failing that, drop me a line and I will send you a copy of the video. And thank you for being here to our friends over in France. I'll happily send you a copy of the video for you to have a look through again, as I say, to share around to your friends and colleagues, particularly anybody that works in car parks. But until tomorrow, thank you very much indeed for being here. Thanks for all your input. Thanks for all the questions and the comments. Really appreciate it. See you all again very, very soon. All the best.